I hope you're seeing the PPT.
Yeah, can see.
Okay. So the last class we were doing about uh, what is that? The distribution of the disease in terms of time, person, place, and then we also did on case report case series, which is actually coming under descriptive epidemiology, and two other categories: ecological or correlational studies and cross-sectional studies, which I told you it can come in descriptive or analytical. If there is a comparison group, it will go to the analytical epidemiology or it will go to the descriptive. Analytical means we'll be using the biostatistical calculations, etc., to make an analysis. Otherwise, we are just describing. So it depends. Typically, under analytical epidemiology, we have two important epidemiological studies, that is case control study, which is also called as case reference studies, and so many other names are there, retrospective studies, etc. And then we have cohort study. And after to that, there is from the observational, we go to the experimental. So in all these study, in the observational, as I told you, we are not doing anything. We are just asking some questions and getting their answers. We are just observing them. We are not doing anything. And in experimental, we'll be interfering. We'll be giving some medicine, vaccine, or whatever. So today's class will start with the analytical epidemiology, the first method being the case control method. Here we saw the hierarchy also. So from case reports, case series, ecological studies, cross-sectional. Now we are moving into case control studies, which is a part of analytical epidemiology. So analytical epidemiology, in contrast to descriptive studies that look at entire population, in analytical study, the subject of interest is the individual within the population. So here also we take a group of people, it's true, like the cross-sectional or the ecological study. Here also we have a group of people, but here we will be going through the results of each individual person so that uh, the unit of study or the unit in this study will be actually individual, not the population. The unit of study, which is population, that only belongs to ecological study. All other studies, cross-sectional, this case control, cohort, or RCT, the randomized control trial or the experimental study, they all have the unit and individual. We are studying a group of people, true, but we know the result of each individual. We consider in the statistical analysis each individual's report. So because of that, the unit over here, it will be individual. The object is not to formulate but to test hypothesis. So while we were doing the descriptive epidemiology, we actually got into some hypothesis, like this might be the reason of or the etiology of that disease. When we describe the time, the population, the persons who are affected, the socioeconomic factors, all these things we put together, we feel like okay, this might be the cause of that disease, but we are not sure. That is how we end with descriptive epidemiology, a etiological hypothesis. But now we are going to test the hypothesis, which means we will be having a comparison group. We will be having a comparison group means a group in which that disease is the and a control group, and then we are going to compare. And how we will compare? Using statistical methods. So that is why we are going to test that hypothesis. It consists of two types, case control study and cohort study. So from this, what we can understand is whether or not a statistical association exists between the disease and a suspected factor. So we'll get to know whether there is a association, whether there is some statistical relationship or that association is statistically proved or not, that we will get to know from analytical epidemiology. And also If there is a connection, if that is a statistically associated one, then how much is that strength? How can we measure that strength? Not just whether they are associated or not, but how much degree they are associated. That is what we get when we do a analytical epidemiology. So starting with case control study, case control study, it is an observational study design and it is used to investigate the association between exposure and the occurrence of a specific outcome or disease. So here, as I told, we are going to study whether some exposure is associated to some outcome. So exposure can be a risk factor and outcome can be a disease. So for example, now whenever we explain, I don't know why, maybe because it is so easy to explain it and also people to understand it. We almost always use the same example, smoking and lung cancer, mostly. So with the same thing, the exposure in case of lung cancer and smoking, the exposure will be the smoking. You are exposed to smoking, and are you ending up with the result, the outcome, that is lung cancer. So in when we did the descriptive epidemiology about the lung cancer, we the people who described it, they ended with a sentence like this: the smoking may be a uh, etiological factor for lung cancer. And you read that somewhere, and now being a researcher, you want to know whether smoking or exposing to the smoking, so that is smoking becomes a exposure factor, whether that is related to lung cancer. So you are going to learn whether there is an association of the exposure and any outcome. So this is a retrospective study, meaning the data on exposure and disease status are collected from the past. We are studying the past, and what that means in the next slides, the picture will come up. At that time, you will understand. Anyway, retrospective means we are looking backward and seeing what has happened. We are not looking forward, we are looking backward in case of case control study. So, what are the objectives? It helps you identify potential risk factors. So, when we are learning something, not just now, I told the most important factor, that is the smoking to the lung cancer, but there can be other related factors also. Maybe the person, he was not a smoker, but he was working in some coal mining area. So that constant exposure to the coal, or he may be working in asbestos factory. So many risk factors you get, or maybe his family had a history of lung cancer. These all you got when you did the descriptive epidemiology. So now we are going to test it. So the objective will become you can identify the possible risk factors or the exposures. You will understand the strength of association. You will know whether they are associated, and if associated, how strongly they are associated, you will get to know. You assess the causality. Though we assess, we can somewhat assess causality. I will say somewhat, but because it is not that easily possible, especially in case control. Causality can be confirmly done in case of the next study, cohort study, but not in case of case control. Case control, we get to know whether they are associated or not whether it is the exact cause or not. We won't get that. Anyway, a somewhat relation we will get to know. This is particularly useful for studying rare diseases or outcomes that take a long time to develop. Uh, so, case control study is used for studying rare diseases, and what that means we'll see later. Like all other study design, this has got advantages and limitations. So here we are going to compare, because I told in analytical studies there will be a comparison. There will be a disease group and also non-disease group. So in case control, the name indicates case control. So we have a case group, a group of people who are having that disease. That is what cases. And control means they don't have disease condition. One second. So here in case, that is the meaning of that term case control. We have case and we have got control. So in the control group, they don't have that particular disease which we are going to study. So if we are going to study smoking and lung cancer, cases are those people who have lung cancer and control are those people who don't have lung cancer. And then we are going to do the observation and compare. This is often called as retrospective study and it is the common first approach to test causal hypothesis. Though we don't get the exact cause over here, for that we have to go to the next study, that is cohort study. So all these are like a step by process. From the case report, when we put that hierarchy, you can imagine it is actually one step forward everything is. So the causal hypothesis, to test it, the first one will be this one, the case control. And it has got four distinct features: two population, cases and control. Uh, and here the exposure and outcome have occurred before the study of the disease, and the study proceeds backward from effect to cause. Effect to cause will be again, the terms actually interchange. When we say exposure, exposure can also means like a risk factor, or it can also be used as cause. And when we say outcome, it can also mean disease, or we can say effect. So the terminology interchanges. So this will be the design of a case control study. So you are going to start a study and you take a group of people who are having a particular disease. So here, lung cancer. These people are having lung cancer. And then you have another group, which is the controls. And they don't have lung cancer. Now, you want to know whether there is, what are the risk factors. So here we can study any risk factor, any risk factors, but now we are concentrating only on one for just you to understand. But for your information, we can take any risk factor, but only one case, okay? It's only lung cancer. We are studying only lung cancer, but we can study a lot of exposure. So you take a group of people who are having lung cancer and a group of people who are not having lung cancer. And then you are going to question them. You give a questionnaire or you take a data. It can be an interview, whichever method of data collection. And you now, if you are seeing that we are taking only one risk factor, that is smoking, you are going to categorize how many people among these cases, or the people who have lung cancer, they were exposed to smoking and they were not having the habit of smoking. So you take a group of people who are having lung cancer, and then you are going to categorize how many of them were exposed to that risk factor or smoking here, and how many were not exposed to smoking. And then you take into the controls. From them also, you take the data and ask to them how many were uh, exposed to smoking and how many were not exposed to smoking. So why we call it as a retrospective study is, here it is actually you are starting here. You're onset being a researcher. The study is starting over here and you're actually going backward. When you start the study, the group of people, the cases, they have actually developed the disease. Whatever disease you are studying, they have actually developed. You are studying on a group of people who are having lung cancer. So they already have developed that disease when you started the study. And they were also exposed to that smoking before you started the study. So it is like a backward, you're going backward. Something had already happened when you started studying, and then you are going backward, asking them the history. So that is why this case control study is called as a retrospective study or a backward study, where both the outcome, which is the disease or lung cancer here, and the exposure, that is smoking, had happened even before you started studying. So that is why, and when you go to the cohort study, which is a prospective study, you can differentiate it better. But for case control, I again repeat, the exposure and the outcome. Exposure is the smoking, and the outcome is the disease, the lung cancer. Both have happened already in the past. Now it is just you are taking data and making some analysis. So this is the basic design of case control study. So now we change the people. So we have a group of cases, we have a group of control, and then we are going to learn how many were exposed and unexposed. And here we can make any risk factors. Like one of your risk factor was, because it is a questionnaire, it depends upon how you are making the questionnaire, what all things you want to learn. So in lung cancer, first one you wanted to learn was how many were exposed to this one, smoking. And then in the same questionnaire, you can ask whether they were working in some coal mining, asbestos factories, etc. So then your second risk factor will be the people who were exposed or who were working in coal mining. The third risk factor will be people who are working in asbestos factory. Then fourth risk factor, what you put may be people who had family history of lung cancer. So whatever you want to study, you can classify the people into different groups. And now you can imagine how many data, how many numbers you are going to get. There will be interconnection. There may be people who have had smoking, but they didn't work in coal mine. There may be people who had smoking and also they were working in coal mining. There may be people who are having all the three, like smoking, then genetic factor, like in the family history, and also they were working in asbestos. And then there will be another category which were not included in all the four. And then you understand when you have this much numbers, a comparison can be done only by the process of statistical analysis. So retrospective, as I told, the nature, it is importance is its retrospective nature, which means we are looking back into time. And this is particularly suitable when the disease has already occurred. So because you are going to study a group of people who had already developed disease, this is particularly suitable, and it is not feasible or practical to conduct a prospective study, which means you want to learn whether smoking will lead to lung cancer. Now, you can't ask people who are not smokers just to make your study valid. You can't ask people, okay, now you start smoking. We will see whether you are going to develop lung cancer later or not. Can't do that. Actually, that is a cohort study, a prospective study. You do something and then you are going to watch what is happening in the future. But in retrospective or the case control, we can't ask the person, like, start smoking, let me see whether the cancer is developing or not. So what we can do that is, because there will be ethical considerations over there. So in those conditions, better take a group of people who have lung cancer already and then go back. Did they have that habit? So that is the basic idea. And this data collection, it can be done by interview. You can make a questionnaire, go for the medical records. You can go to the hospital. There may be cancer research hospitals. Go there, or simply any hospital, and take their records, and then available other sources. And then you get to know who are the people who are having lung cancer now. Get their address, go meet them, or send them a questionnaire, whatever method, and we get the numbers. So there are four steps in this case control study. One is selection of cases and control. The first one, when you have to study, you have to select. After once you decided what topic you are going to study and which method you are going to study, and you decided that you are going to do a case control study, then you have to, first step will be how to select the cases and control, because this matters a lot. The second one will be matching. The third one, measurement of exposure. And last one will be analysis and interpretation. So we will go through the process one by one. The selection process. So cases and control have to be selected over here very carefully. When we are taking the cases, actually cases we will get somewhat easily, as we already go to hospitals or some research centers, you will get the data. But it is difficult to get a control somewhat similar. So if the selection has not done properly, there can be some error that is happening in case control study. So that is why we have to be very sure about how we are collecting our sample. So cases and control are selected based on defined criteria. If in your earlier studies, if you have done some dissertation, you might be very sure about inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So you know what are the criteria you have to keep when you are including certain subjects or sample in your study, and what are the exclusion feature. So we have to set that criteria, and according to that only we have to select the people. So there is a strict protocol that we have to follow when we are doing a research study. And this selection process based on defined criteria is done to ensure that the process is unbiased. So the selection of cases we can take from hospital records, health databases, disease registries, cancer and all. There will be a national registry for cancer conditions. Not sure about Malaysia, but definitely for India there is. So probably for Malaysia also there should be a cancer or any registry. Then controls. Control should be selected from the same source population as the cases and should be representative. So when we take controls, control should be those people who don't have that disease which we are studying. And how we are going to select the people? This is not an easy task. This is not an easy task because when we do a study, we have two aims actually. One, it should be valid, uh, and that validity should have an internal validity and external validity. Internal validity means whatever you did, that study, it should be true. It shouldn't be manipulated. And that is internal validity. And whatever you studied, because you had wasted your lifetime, not your lifetime, but a lot of time on this study, probably this study is usually done in case of PhD and all. So you know the kind of hard work you have to put in to take all this data. And when you do that, it is not just to write a thesis, you need to make something out of it. So whatever report or final answer you are getting, it should be able to be applied to the whole population. Because when you're studying, you're not studying the whole population, you're not taking the whole Malaysian population and study, you're taking a sample. So a few number which is the true representative of the population. And then your intention is whatever end result that you got, if it is true, if you have not manipulated, that should be applied to the whole population. Then only your study is of value. Otherwise, if it is confining, your report is confining to only 30 people or 40 people whom you have studied, it doesn't have any validity or any use in a general population. So, whenever we take a sample, we should be very sure that it is a true representative. So when we take the cases from hospital records, we need to take the controls also from the same population, not from a different one. And they should be a true representation of the population so that the result we get, we can apply to the whole population also. So sources of cases from hospital, clinic based, which is very easier to find, and it can be represent severe cases, because though we this is one of the problem with the selection bias. We take a hospital and we take patients from there. So in a way we are very easy, just go to the hospital, you get the cases. But there is a problem associated. Suppose you are going to a government hospital, which means people coming over there belong to a particular socio-economic group. It is not that the high-fi rich people are going to come to a government hospital. It will be only a section of people, a lower middle class or a still lower, the people who are in a lower income. These will be the people majorly seen in a government hospital. So, and then when you go to a very high-fi private hospital, you're going to get that few creamy layer section of the society who are extremely rich. So when you concentrate your studies, suppose you are studying only in high-fi hospital, then your patients are mostly those high rich people, And then the result you get, you can't apply to the general population because the general population is not just rich people. Similarly, the vice versa also. If you are going to study only the government hospital, then the section of the people you are studying are of particular socioeconomic group, and then you get a result. Even if the internal validity, whatever you did is correct, there won't be any external validity. You can't apply it to the general population because the whole population, the general population, is not consisting of this low middle class or people who are even below to that level. So a better will be you're going to mix up the hospitals and then you take so that you get a whole representation or a true representation of that general population. That is one thing, the socio-economic. The second problem with the hospital is, though you get it easily, people who come to hospitals will be those who are having major or severe cases. People who are having very less severity, probably mostly, they will avoid going to the hospitals. So whichever study you are going, if you are just concentrating in hospital, it is very easy to collect the data. That is why researchers go over the, but you get only the severe cases. So whatever report you get finally after 2 year study, that is not applicable to the general population because the people you have studied only the hospital based registry, which means in hospitals only those people will be coming who are accepting or receiving the therapy like chemotherapy, radiotherapy, etc. So you won't get to the people who are having the cancer if you are doing the staging, the stage one, the stage two, you won't be getting that. You will be studying only the stage three, stage four patients. So that also report finally you get, you can't apply to the general population. So that is the problem with the selection bias. When we, for our easiness, we go and we select a population, but we should be aware what could be the mistakes we can bring, whether whatever whomever you selected, the cases and the controls you selected, are they a true representation of the population outside. Then there is a cancer registry. This is somewhat okay because in cancer registry, usually it is a total register for a nation, which includes the name of patients and their addresses or whatever, who all are having cancer in Malaysia. Like if Malaysia is having a cancer registry, then you take that from all the different states, all the different in hospitals also. If you are going to study, you may get only the people who are having cancer in Kuala Lumpur. You may not be getting the people. I mean, if your hospital were only in Kuala Lumpur, you will never get the result of the people who have cancer and living in Pahang, Malacca, like that, distant places. So then also it's not a true representation of the population. But if you go to the population based on the cancer registry, then you get to know the patients who are varying in their severity of different socioeconomic status, and also from the rural and also the urban population, and also people who are belonging to different geographical areas. But this is not easy. If you don't have a cancer registry, if the government is not updating it, then also it won't become a true representation. So you should be very careful where you are taking and how you are taking the cases. Likewise, the control also, you have to be very careful. You can take from the same sources like the population based. From this one, cancer registry, you were taking a population based one. You go and take from the whole population. Like that, you can take a whole population based, like some people of a particular age or a particular sex. If your question is like that, from Kuala Lumpur, then Pahang, Malacca, and whatever places. Okay, I know only very few places in Malaysia. That's why I'm same repeatedly saying the same states, but you know other places. So you can select the controls like that, but be sure that they don't have lung cancer. You can select the controls from the same hospitals where you selected the cases, like people who are having other diseases. People in the same hospital, some patients, I mean, every patients will be coming, but those people who don't have lung cancer, you can take them also, but be careful. Whatever disease they are having, it shouldn't be associated in any way to lung cancer. Then you can go for case based, like if the person you selected, a particular case you selected, you can select the control from among his friends or his neighborhood. So these are the different sources by which you take the cases and controls, but should be very sure because case control study is associated with a selection bias or a selection error, and that can make or bring about a error in your study. So what to do to avoid this error? The best method to avoid the bias or the error is to bring a matching. The case and the control you select should be matched to each other. So we have two types of matching. One is group matching and another one is pair matching. You can go for any method of matching. So group matching will be, as the name indicates, you are going to group the people. Like in, you have the cases which are who are having lung cancer, and you will group that people. Okay, within the cases you will group the people like a particular socioeconomic category, particular age factor, particular occupation, particular sex. You are going to do a grouping like that, and then the control also will be grouped accordingly. You take a particular group of sex, of a particular age group, a particular occupation, like that a particular matching is being done. So that there won't be any bias, or to reduce that bias maximally, you make that matching very much like in a relationship or whatever. When we are coming into a normal life, I mean, not the epidemiology come out, so when relationships are made, it's better like in a arranged marriage or something, we go for the maximum, the typical Indian style, we go for the maximum matching, so that the differences between them will be very much reduced. So like that, this is the same concept over there. The cases and control who are coming into, to avoid that selection bias, make it maximum matching how much it is possible. So one is group matching. We are dividing the people into categories, and then the same category people we are considering in the controls also. Or we can go for pair matching. Pair matching will be like one to one. Like here we won't be grouping. For example, one of your study, suppose, God forbid, I'm having lung cancer. So you are going to select a person in a control, a person who is of Indian ethnicity, of the same age group of mine, a female, yeah, like that. Some a matching between me and the control. That is a pair matching. You can select like that. Or if it was a group matching, I belong to, you can put me into a group of lecturers. So then you will be having a group of lecturers in the control group. So that is how you do the matching. Either you can go for a group matching, you can go for a pair matching. Pair matching is okay if the case number you are studying is very less, then it is fine. But it is not okay if you're like if you're selecting 3,000 people, for example, for your study. For 3,000 people, you find 3,000 pair. It is not easy. That is why the selection of controls become very difficult in a case control study. But in group matching, if there are 3,000 people, you can group them, and then somewhat it will be easier to do the matching. Uh, so that is the concept of matching, the group matching and pair matching, and it is done so that the case and control are true representative of the population also, and you can reduce the selection bias. So group matching or pair matching, it helps to control for confounding variables. What is confounding variable? It will come up in future slides. And it also increases the internal validity. As I told you, uh, the genuinity or the correctness of what you did, that study, it will be increased in case you do this matching. And this will also reduce the risk of bias, especially the selection bias. So in case of group matching, I already told you the example. Still, study on hypertension and smoking. So you're learning that hypertension and smoking. So smoking will be the exposure and hypertension is the outcome. So you're going to investigate the association between hypertension and smoking among middle-aged adults. So your population is that. So cases will be adults age 40 to 55 years with diagnosed hypertension because cases should have the disease complaint which you are studying. So they should be having hypertension and they belong to the age group 40 to 55 years. And then your controls will be adults age 40 to 55 years without diagnosed hypertension because they shouldn't have the disease. So they shouldn't have hypertension and they belong to the same age group. So that is a group matching. You group the people according to one criteria that was age and then you select the controls according to that group matching. Then the pair matching, the study is on diabetes and body mass index to explore the relationship between diabetes and BMI. And it is among the adults. So cases will be here, unlike this one, you have not mentioned which age group. You have not told here in a group matching, you did the middle age, but here you have not put any middle age or something. You just put adults, which means it could be any person from the age of 19 or leave 19 from 20 to until 80 or 90. Everyone, it belongs to the group of adults. So you don't have a particular categorization made. So here in pair matching, the cases will be adults with diabetes and controls will be non-diabetic adults. The matching variable can be age, like within 5-year range. So as I already told you, if I am one person, then you find out someone among my ethnicity and also my age group, and then you find a suitable pair. So once you do the case control study, you get a lot of number and the end result is you can calculate something called as odds ratio. So this is something you have to remember. In case control study, you get a odds ratio, OR. So what is an odds ratio? Odds ratio is a measure of association between exposure and an outcome. When you do all these things, you put into certain numbers and the final answer you get, it will be a odds ratio in case control study. And case control study, odds ratio means it is a measure of association. Uh, we get to know whether there is an association between exposure and also an outcome, and if there is an association, what is that strength of association? That we get to know. And odds ratio is that value which give us the strength of association. So OR, it represents the odds. Odds we can say as chances, in other words, that an outcome will occur given a particular exposure compared to the odds of the outcome occurring in the absence of that exposure, which means when we do the odds ratio, when we are calculating it, we are following a concept that what are the chances that a person can develop lung cancer if he is having smoking, and what are the chances a person can develop lung cancer if he is not smoking. I repeat, what are the chances a smoker will develop lung cancer, and what are the chances a non-smoker will develop a lung cancer? Now we put it into numbers. Um, you say that 80% of smokers will end up with lung cancer. That's your one assumption, people who are smoking. And then you say 10 percentage of non-smokers will end up with a lung cancer. So then from that statement itself, you can understand, okay, smoking is a big factor. Uh, we have not measured the extract strength over here, that we will be going later, but you now understand when I say that numbers, you understand that the people, 80% of people who are smoking, they are ending with lung cancer means smoking and lung cancer are strongly related. But now I change the sentence. I say that 80% of smokers end up with lung cancer And then I say 80% of non-smokers end up with lung cancer, which means now you understand smoking cannot be a factor of lung cancer, because even if you smoke and even if you don't smoke, 80% are ending with lung cancer means smoking is not a risk. So odds ratio, it will give you a measurement whether something exposure and outcome is related, and if they are related, how strongly they are related. So this represents that an outcome, the odds, the chances that an outcome will occur, or lung cancer can occur when there is smoking, compared to the chances that lung cancer can occur even in the absence of that exposure, even if you are not smoking, so that you understand whether the exposure or the risk factor is actually having some association with the outcome. So odds ratio is mostly used in case control study. MCQ can come from this part. However, it can also be used in cross-sectional and cohort study. But this I kept as something to keep in your memory in your future studies when you're going to do. Otherwise, for this level, the BHMS level, you don't have to remember. You have to just remember that first sentence. The case control study, what we get to know is OR. So now we just go back. You remember when we do the cross-sectional study, when we do the cross-sectional, the other one, the cross-sectional, the previous study, the cross-sectional, we end up with the prevalence. And now we do the case control study, we are ending up with odds ratio. So remember these things, because this will be what MCQ will be asked. And now when we go to cohort study, you'll see that when we do a cohort study, some other things are coming up, some other values can be calculated. So you need to keep in memory in which study what you will get as an end result. So in case control, it is the odds ratio, and in cross-sectional study, it is the prevalence that we get to know. So we will calculate odds ratio using a 2 by 2 frequency table, which is somewhat similar to this. So you make a 2 by 2 table, the cases, people who are having lung cancer and who were exposed to smoking. Then people who are having lung cancer but were not smoking. Likewise, people who don't have lung cancer because they are the control group, but they were smoking. And people who don't have lung cancer, but they were not smoking also. And then you make, this is how the numbers what you collect will be ultimately put. And this is the formula that we do for odds ratio. You can see how they have come into this final analysis. It will be finally AD by BC. And I'm not getting into this much detail because this is more when it comes into a research study. But anyway, this is how they calculate odds ratio. What you need to know is this slide. Even if you don't remember how odds ratio is collected, how that 2 into 2 table is made, doesn't matter anything. But the thing that at the end of the case control study, you get the odds ratio. And what you mean by that odds ratio, what is how you can interpret, because odds ratio will be a number. It is a ratio, two values divided, as like here we told AD by BC. When you do that, you're going to end with a number. So what is that number? What is the meaning of that number? That you need to know. So if odds ratio is equal to 1, if when you divide that numerator by denominator, you are either going to get equal to 1, less than 1, or more than 1. So if it is equal to 1, which means there is no association. The exposure, what you studied, smoking, and the outcome, lung cancer. If the final thing, if you have not done any mistakes from your part, no errors have happened. Some slight errors is possible. Okay, every research study will have some slight errors. It's human actually, but still, mostly if you have not done any manipulation or something, and you get a odds ratio which is equal to 1, it means that the risk factor and the outcome is not related. They are not associated. If odds ratio is more than 1, then it is positively associated. Like you did the study and you get a odds ratio which is 8, which means the exposure, that is smoking, is associated to lung cancer. And because it is more than 1, which means they are associated. positively associated. And there is also another thing, how much the number is increasing, that much the strength of association is increasing. So if you say the odds is 8, which means there are 8 times chances that the person who is smoking will develop lung cancer. But if your odds ratio is still higher, like 20, 30, 40, blah, 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 like that, how much high number it goes, uh, that that shows that the strength is that much stronger, or the association, sorry, the association between the exposure and the outcome is very, very, very strong, as much the number is increasing. And if it is or less than 1, or is less than 1 means there is association there also, but it is negatively associated. And what is meaning by negatively associated? It means it is not a causative one, the exposure, but the protective one. For example, you were studying about chronic heart disease, CHD, and you were studying a lot of risk factors. I told you in case control, you can study any number of risk factors. So when you were doing CHD, you decided to use hypercholesteremia, you decided to use substance abuse, that is alcohol, and also what is that, smoking in your study as a risk factor. You wanted to know obesity as a risk factor. You wanted to know the influence of uh, sedentary habits, and then you also wanted to know the influence of um, fibrous food or vegetables on heart disease, and you also wanted to know the effect of uh, exercises on heart disease. Now, with your medical knowledge now, you know that being all these, out of all these, which are the risk factors, you know. Yeah. But imagine it is a situation like you don't know anything about. You don't know anything about, if it is a new disease and you are studying newly. So you have put a lot of things from the descriptive epidemiology, whatever that researcher had put. This was seen in this, and among that he told that the the people who are doing exercises. Uh, Exercise also seems to have a positive effect. Positive effect in the sense protective effect on CHD. So when you study these risk factors, if actually going to gym or doing exercises, if that is a protective factor, that is protecting the patient from the CHD, when you do the OR of that one, you will be getting less than 1. So, which means the risk factor, not a risk factor actually, the factor or the exposure factor which you were studying is not actually causing that outcome, but it is actually protecting from that outcome. So that is the meaning of odds ratio, or equal to 1, there is no relationship, there is no association. If it is more than 1, there is a positive association. A smoking is becoming a etiological factor for the development of lung cancer. And how much that number is increasing, that much strength of association is also increasing. And if it is less than 1, it is not the factor, whichever, the exposure factor, whichever we studied, it is not causing that outcome, but in fact, it is a protective factor that is indicating less than 1. So this also you should remember what is the meaning of that odds ratio, what is the meaning of that number finally you get. So what are the advantages of case control study? It is less expensive, of course. It is not at all much costly. You need to make some questionnaires. That's all. It is easier to do and take less time. This is particularly done if the disease is rare, like you want to learn some rare diseases. So it is not easy for you to wait until that rare disease to occur, then you study. But if there are already patients who are having that disease, and then you can do very easily a case control study because already the cases are there. So this is useful when the disease is either rare or when there is a long period of time between exposure to the outcome, like cancers. It is not that you do smoking today and 2 months later you're going to develop cancer. Never. Cancer is always going to be a long duration time, and you want to support you want to submit your PhD thesis. You can't wait until 10, 20 years for the cancer to develop and then you submit your PhD thesis. So, which means if the outcome is rare, or if it takes a long duration for the development of that particular disease, then the best method to go is case control study. Here we can study multiple exposures, as I told you, because we have the cases, we can put the questionnaire anyway, and we can add any question. And so we can learn a lot of exposures, like in the case of lung cancer, not just smoking, but many other factors I already discussed. And depending on the exposure and outcome, the design may be the only ethical way to evaluate something. And as I told you, just to know whether smoking and lung cancer is related, we can't ask people to start smoking and then we study. It's not ethical way. So better start with people who have had lung cancer and then go back whether did they do the smoking or not. Then disadvantages, we get to know whether there is an association. We already told that, but it cannot explain causation. It is the first step that for testing the hypothesis, the etiological hypothesis. This is the first step. We'll get to know whether there is an association, and if there is an association, what is the strength of it. But there is something called as temporality. Temporality, which means a sequence, a linear thing, a time development something. We can't prove that in case of case control study. Um, in other words, you can say smoking will lead to lung cancer, but you can never say in how much years it is taking place, or is it a direct relationship. Uh, like that, a sequence cannot be given. And why we can't, and that sequence is very important, and that sequence is what we call as temporality. That temporality is not possible in case of case control, but this temporality can be solved in cohort study. When we do the next advanced study, cohort study, we can prove that temporality. So here we can't explain causation. There is a limitation with temporality. We can't connect a complete sequence with regard to linear timing in case of case control. And why we cannot do that is, um, here we are relying on the answers given by the cases and control. And maybe people who have done smoking and they develop cancer, they remember the sequence very well. But in case of people who have smoked and they didn't develop lung cancer, you ask them question, because you're asking questions to them which happened in their 20s. You ask them, have you had smoking? The answer might be yes, if it is they have done the smoking. And then you ask, when did you start? How many people you think at the age of 60s or 70s will be remembering at what age did they actually start smoking? They might be remembering in case if they developed lung cancer. Suppose if they didn't develop lung cancer, they are the control group. How many people will be remembering? Only a very few. You won't get the correct number. And and to that people itself, you ask how much number of uh, uh, cigarettes they used to smoke in one day. Are they going to remember the correct number? Then you can ask some questions like, did they used to have um, alcohol at the time when they were smoking? You won't get a reliable answer. Put in short, that is the thing. Because all these case control is completely relying on the answers given by the people, and then their memory is affected. People won't even remember what happened previous week, and you are going to ask them the questions that happened 20, 30, 40 years before. So there is something called as recall bias, where they may not be remembering exactly what happened, how it happened, and you are also relying on what they are saying. You have not seen it with your own eyes. As a researcher, you should be very sure what has happened, you're witnessing it, and then only it becomes a valid thing. But here, because of all these factors, or you can't wait until the lung cancer is developing to put a study. So you have to rely whatever the person have told. That is why don't get a temporality. We get, okay, smoking is related to lung cancer. But how it is related, what is the sequence of relating? If it is a large number of cigarettes was smoked, then in how many years this developed? Or if it is only one, then in how many years it developed? That a type of sequencing you won't get in case of case control. So the temporality is affected. That is the meaning. So case control is suitable for generating hypothesis of causality than confirming. It is the first step of testing, but the confirmation of causality or this temporality can be done only in cohort study because we are relying on the people, whatever answer they are giving. So there can be a recall bias. So to reduce it, we can use standardized questionnaires, but still there will be some errors possible. Then, as I told, there will be selection bias in case of cases and control, how you selected it. Now, case control studies, when we take the hierarchy, it is below systematic review, meta-analysis. Oh my God, I should say. So this will be lower to systematic review, meta-analysis, RCT, and cohort study, but are about to cross-sectional surveys and case reports, if you remember that triangle. So that is about the case control study. Now we go towards, now we go
Mm,
towards,
Dr. Mira,
yeah.
the the uh, the focus group discussion in the lab report that you assign us,
Hmm?
does it need to do up to this kind of analysis or just a simple one?
No, no, you don't have to. I just need the questions only
The
because,
simple questionnaire.
yeah, only question. I don't even
Do
want
we
the
need to do
answer.
grouping as what you discussed just now in the previous topic, the grouping, or we do case grouping, or we
No,
do
no,
the
nothing,
no
nothing,
need, right?
nothing.
Just a
Because the main,
simple questionnaire.
yeah, yeah, because the main idea between that is the population with whom you are doing the focus group discussion. That
Yeah, yeah.
population is different, and yeah, then the people who are doing the in-depth interview, that people will be different. So how you will approach them, the question, the logic, how that connectedness, the question will be connected. Only that matters. I want to just see because the questions you ask to a group of people in focus group discussion, the
Mm-hmm.
same topic like homeopathy, you can't ask that question in an in-depth interview. You can ask, but mostly the question pattern will be different. Because in focus group discussion, usually you're going to take a group of people who don't have particular idea. Like for homeopathy, you're going to take a group of people, students from here, and then you're going to ask. So definitely your question will be somewhat like, have you heard of homeopathy? From where you have heard it? What you have heard it? What you think about it, etc. And in-depth interview, usually it is done with an expert or some one person among this focus group discussion. So that person, usually in-depth interview, you have to keep an expert person. For example, the question in-depth interview will be to a homeopathic doctor. So to the homeopathic doctor, you are not going to ask, have you heard homeopathy? From where did you hear? You can ask that how you were interested in homeopathy, that too initially, and then the questions will go like what do you say about the action of whomever is doing homeopathy. I'm giving the clue. But yeah, you can go to that person asking like what is your experience about treatment of homeopathy, where you have seen your failures or your successes, in what cases it gets successful. So the style of question changes in case of a in-depth interview. You will be going in-depth interview will be, as the name indicates, it will be going deeper, 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 deeper. the question pattern will changes. And focus group discussion, it is a group of people who are not expertised in that. So then the question pattern will be more superficial, like what they generally think about it. So focus group discussion, the questions will be in a wider plane, but in an in-depth, it will be going deep, 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 deep. So I just want to see the logical connection, how you bring the question. That's it. I don't want even the answers also. There should be a logic connection between that questions. That's all.
So we no need to analyze after we have collected the question A.
No,
No need.
no, because
Okay.
for that and all you need to learn biostatistics, and I think that is coming towards a later part only. This part
Yeah,
it is
yeah,
just a superficial idea, and I'm also not that expert in biostatistics. I also know only a little bit of biostatistics, not extremely like some biostatistician. So maybe
yeah,
you'll
yeah.
learn at that time. Now, just a questionnaire, how that pattern differs. That's it.
Okay.
So we done with the case control. And now there is some terms that you should know. We already discussed one of this. The two terms that you have to study is bias and confounding. You need to know what is bias and confounding. So there are different types of bias, and some bias will be seen in some studies. That and in case control, we already discussed the bias like the selection bias, the recall bias, and there are other types also. Some other type of bias we can see in RCT, which is going to come up. We can see some other type of bias in cohort also. So bias is a general topic. A few of the bias will be there in case control, some in other type. And the second topic we have to discuss is confounding. So we'll take with the bias. So bias is actually referred as errors. And this errors, it will be systematic errors. That's the term we use. It will be errors or systematic errors. And this error can happen in the designing, conduct, or analysis of a study that can lead to distorted or misleading result. So this is an error that is happening, and that error, it can happen while you are designing your research study. You took a research study, and when you were doing your research methodology or making a designing, it can be regarding your population selection, your sample selection, can be anywhere. When you were making a design, error can creep in the, or it can error can happen in the conduct. Conduct like when you were conducting the method, like the data collection. When you were conducting that interview, a mistake that happened from your part, or it can be anyone, like a data collector. You need to take data collection from 3,000 people. Sometimes you keep people, not the PhD people actually, because they don't have much money. But if it is a research that is happening in some research center, they will be having investigators in the field area to collect the data. And sometimes we can't trust these people because it is happening in some rural area. You are not every day going and seeing. Maybe one or two of them, the field investigators, they don't even go to the site. They may be manipulating the report. Maybe they wouldn't even have gone to the sample. They will be just writing some people's name, some people's data according to their own mind. So error can happen when conducting that test, or error can happen also during analysis when you were doing the statistical analysis. Like usually statistical analysis will be using the softwares, SPSS, SAS, R, so many things are there. So when you were, or even the Excel sheet. So when you were transferring the data, or when you were selecting this statistical analysis in SPSS, if some of you, if you know SPSS, you made a simple mistake in clicking, I mean, in selecting one of the option, unknowingly you selected the second one, or the next one, to what you want had to select. And when the result comes, you're not understanding that. You just see the result, and then you're copy pasting it to the report you are making. So a mistake that have brought into the analysis, that will lead into a error, and that is called as bias. So bias is actually error which can happen in the design stage, can happen in the context stage, or during the statistical analysis, and that will lead to distorted, or misleading results. These errors can occur due to flaws in the methodology. As I told you, whatever methodology we put in, the population selection, sample selection, or the way we decided to do that study, anything can result, or due to some extraneous factor from the participants or the data collectors or the researchers, some external factor that happen, it can result. So this will affect the validity and reliability of the study finding. Whether whatever you did, is it correct or not, it matters. I mean, it is going to be inaccurate. So what are the types of bias? We have five or six. The first one is selection bias. Second one is information bias. And then there is confounding bias. Fourth one, observer bias. And fifth one, publication bias. So we start with the selection bias, and this we have already discussed earlier in case control. And in case control, we are having the selection bias because there is a mistake with we are selecting the population or the sample. And here, if it is a non-representative sample, then we are going to have some problem. So the first one will be healthy user bias, which means MCQs can come from this part. Uh, when healthier individuals are more likely to be included in the study, leading to an underestimation of the association between exposure and disease. Healthy user bias, which means when we are going to take two samples, and usually this is going to come in RCT, not in case control. So you're going to take more of healthy people, then the answer you get may be varied. So here I can't explain because this is mainly we did with case control, so I can't explain, but this is a factor usually coming in RCT when we are going to take healthy people more in our study and disease people less, there can be some error. The second one, Buxonian, that is actually happening in case control, and I already explained you. I didn't give any name. It occurs in hospital-based controls. So in case control, we are selecting the controls from the hospital. So leading to an artificial association between exposure and disease due to different hospital admission rates of cases and control. Buxonian or Buxon, both are same. It happens when we are going to select controls from the hospitals, which won't give a correct representation actually. So ultimately, all of these bias or the selection bias, it means it is not a true representative of the general population, but according to the situation where it is happening, the term changes. So if you are going to select the sample from the hospitals, because of the reasons I already told you, the socioeconomic factor, the severity of the diseases, the geographical pattern, this can't be applied to the general population. So such type of hospital-based controls can lead to Bergsonian bias. So when you're doing that, you should be aware of all these bias possible. You know that you're going to take a hospital because you're doing PhD and you don't have much time or cash to go into other areas. So for your benefit, you're taking a hospital-based uh, uh, what is that hospital-based sample. You can of course you can take, but then you should be aware of this bias. And in your research methodology, the protocol that which you lay in, you have to explain how you are going to address this Bergsonian bias. So that's a uh, basic idea about it, that you know what is the problem of taking population sample from a hospital, and then what you have done in your study to rectify this bias. That is what it is meant. Then non-response bias. Non-response, as the name indicate, you selected a lot of people for your study. The controls, like you selected 3,000 cases, and how many number of controls? Usually, it is told you can go for double or triple the number. Like cases you are studying 3,000, then controls can be 6,000 to 9,000. Minimum there should be at least say 4,000 at least. So there is a particular number that you have to follow, and we assume that cases may be sticking on with you because cases are having cases also maybe not every case is going to reply you when you go to uptake case taking, not case taking, you're going to do an interview, they may not cooperate also. So, and it is going to be still higher if it is a control group. They will be like, why waste my time? And that you have 6,000 people. And sometimes you may be like, you might have already received. I mean, we all might be receiving. We sometimes get a Google form uh, or something of that sort where we have to give a feedback review. Like when we get into Grab, that app, they access the feedback. Amazon, back in India, Swiggy and Zomato. I don't know whether it is over here. So how many of us give a review back? It's very rare. We'll go for a skipping like that. You can send, because when you collect the data, it is said that you can send it via email. You can post it. How many of people are going to send you the reply back? So there can be a non-response bias also when they are not responding. So how we are going to address that bias? That also should be there in your article. Anyway, this is the errors that can come in. So when participants who do not respond to the study invitation, and that differs systematically from people who do respond, that lead to biased estimate. You take 9,000 people for as a control and only 2,000 replied, and your cases are actually 3,000. So there is a big difference in that estimation. So that is selection bias. Then information bias, bias or that error is happening with regard to information collected. So this can be recall bias, interviewer bias, and misclassification bias. Recall bias, we already saw that is happening in case control. The persons are not able to recall exactly how it happened, where it happened. That linearity won't be able to be given. So that is recall bias. Interviewer bias is you are interviewing people, and you are interviewing a person, a case who is having lung cancer, and you get the first question in the questionnaire, you get the feature that he was smoking. Wow, fantastic. You're going to spend 1 hour with that person to get as much as information as possible. And then you go to next person. He's not having, as a control, he's not having cancer. He didn't do smoking. What you will do? Generally, all the people, all the researchers, including me, because we don't have much time, and that is an error actually we do. We finish the questionnaire with that person or questioning with that person in just 10 minutes. So that is a interviewer bias. The information, when we see that from particular person, we are going to get a lot of information. We spend a lot of time from him to get answers, and that will be complete in every sense, will be too much involved. But in then another person, we know that we are not going to get much from him, so we won't be bothered. And that is a error, and that is interviewer bias. So when interviewers unintentionally influence participants response during data collection, it leads to a biased information. Because to avoid this, actually it is told that you should spend equal time with both the people. The person who has smoked and developed lung cancer, you spend 45 minutes with him, and like asking, not just spending, you ask the same questions, give him the same time, and get the answer. And the other person also who have not smoked, who have not developed cancer, you need to spend 45 minutes asking the same questions and take his reply as genuinely possible to avoid the interviewer bias. Then misclassification, that's a mistake from our part, that we put the classification wrongly, like exposure and outcome. You made a mistake with that. It can also lead into a error. So that is regarding bias or the error that is happening in during with the information. Then there is confounding bias. Confounding bias, there is a, which means it is there is a third factor which is affecting, and that we'll see in coming up slide. Then there is observer bias. Observer bias is also called as measurement bias, which means earlier that affected, or mm, one that I explained already, a bias which is made from our part. Observer feel like one person can give a potential source of information and then spend more time with that. A mistake from our part, observation. Because one of the method for data collection can be direct observation also. We just watch the people from a distance. We are not asking any questions from them. We are just watching the people, and then we are assuming the things. That's another method of data collection. This method of data collection you will be learning in biostatistics at that time, the different methods. So one of the method is observing. So for example, I can just say you are observing how many people or youngsters are having smoking. So you're not going into any student or asking them, are you smoking? You're not doing. But what you do is you are standing nearby to a school, and uh, suppose in that area, in that nearby to that school, there is a shop, a grocery or whatever. I don't know what cigarettes are sold over here, but there is a shop where cigarettes are sold, and then you're standing as if you're simply standing, and no one know that you are a researcher, you are doing this study, nothing. You're just standing over there, and you see how many students are coming and buying the cigarettes, and then you are making an assumption that this many students are buying, and that's a preconceived idea. What you collected may not be correct. It is possible that some of the students who bought it, they bought it for other persons, not for themselves, and it is also possible that they bought it to sell in some other for other people, they are not using by themselves. So we can't uh, assume whatever we see with our eyes to be truthful. So that is a bias from our part, that I saw a 10-year-old is buying a cigarette, and I assume that he is buying for himself. There is a probability that he is buying for himself, but there is also a probability that his father had told him, maybe he had told him to bring cigarette uh, from the nearby shop when he's coming from school. We don't expect parents to say that, but it is possible. So the probabilities are there. So when we have a preconceived idea because your intention is to prove before starting. It's always told when you do the research methodology, the initial introduction itself, it's given that you shouldn't have a preconceived idea that this is going to be my result, because then you will bring it or manipulate it in such a manner to end with that same result. So you have to be completely unprejudiced over here. I could use the homeopathic term, and you shouldn't have any bias. Should be very neutral. So a mistake from your part, from the observer part, if it is happening, then that is also, and that is based on their preconceived belief or knowledge, and that lead to biased observation. Then there can be publication bias, because whatever you do now, two main intentions are there: either to get into a academic job, like a PhD if you are doing, and or for a promotion, and for that you need publications. And if your study didn't prove anything, it was a null study in the sense it didn't give a positive result or something, that is also a result. Even the negative result is also a result. But then publications, they will be more interested if there is a positive association. They won't be much interested if there is no association. Not all, but sometimes. So you know that if to get published this article, you have to manipulate. So then you manipulate it, which is also an error. And this one we can say like maybe not just observation, we can just go for a RCT. Like we are giving medicine pulsatilla for uh, this one, PCOS. And we saw that pulsatilla was not able to cure PCOS. But still, it means that you can't give that case report to publish anywhere because pulsatilla has not cured PCOS. And then you manipulate the result and then you publish. So that is also an error, a publication. For the publication, you manipulated the idea, that is publication bias. So essentially, the epidemiologists should be aware of these types of bias, and why they need to aware, because they have to minimize or control bias during their study design, data collection and analysis. So whenever you are doing, there will be some bias that is creeping in because it's a research study, some bias will be there. So during the what is that defending period, defense of PhD thesis, at that time People who are sitting over there, the supervisors and the experts, they know that the bias will be coming. So the question will be like, uh, do you know what are the bias and what you have done to reduce that bias? So this is the basic idea of having know about bias. So addressing the bias ensures that the study findings are accurate and reliable. Now we go to the second one, which I told you, confounding variables or confounders, which is a third factor, unknown to us, but creeping in the study. And if we are not aware of that, it is possible that we are not aware of that. Then there are methods how to reduce it. But if we are not aware about that, this is going to create an error in our study. So confounding variables, it is a third variable, or we call it as a confounder, which is associated between the exposure and an outcome and influence both of it, and we are not aware about it. So there is something we are studying, a direct relationship, exposure, outcome. And then we are not aware that there is something common in between which can influence both the exposure and outcome. And this can bring about an error. And such a third variable or an extraneous variable is called as confounder. We'll get to know when we go for the example. So somewhere article you learn when we are doing a study on descriptive epidemiology, or you were reading some articles, descriptive article, and then you saw that one sentence where the researcher had put on like coffee drinking can lead to heart disease. So you're studying on that coffee drinking and heart disease. You're just thinking about coffee and heart disease, and you happen to find out that coffee drinking leads to heart disease. Maybe you were studying about the causes for heart disease, and you had put actually coffee drinking as also an exposure. In case control, we saw that if we are going to study heart disease, we can put how much our exposures you want, and then you do the calculations. So here, when you were doing, you put simply coffee also. It's like tea, coffee. You put that also. So when you saw that you did the OR, you got coffee, which is having like a OR, you got 3 or 4, which means coffee can lead to heart disease. That is your ultimate result actually. But then there is another thing that might be underlying. These coffee drinking people, they will be usually having smoking. It's not, it's very rare. I mean, it's common also. Not most of the people who are doing or taking coffee or even tea, whatever, they might be at the same time smoking also. So it is not actually the coffee that is directly leading to heart disease, but it is coffee. And during coffee, it is not that coffee alone they are drinking, they are smoking also. So this smoking is an extraneous factor which you were not thinking. And this smoking, it is related to the exposure, the coffee, and it is also related to the heart disease. So this, if you are not aware of this third factor, then your result is going to be wrong. You are directly going to connect coffee drinking to heart disease. The next day, one of the newspaper is going to publish your result that coffee leads to heart disease, and people stop drinking. It's not going to happen, but still people may get panic. Oh my God, then we should stop drinking coffee. And then the coffee people, the coffee companies, they will be putting a case against you, and then it's going to be a big problem. So in those cases, such a third factor could be the which are actually this third factor, it is related to exposure and it is related to outcome also. And if you are not aware of this third factor, then whatever study you do, the result, it can be wrong. So that is called as a confounder. We have another example. The same heart disease. You were learning about the this thing. What is that? Heart disease and the risk factors. And you got into the assumption that the physical inactivity can lead to heart disease. Of course, it is possible, but then this physical inactivity is also related to age. You didn't consider that factor among your study group. It is related physical inactivity leading to heart disease. It may be true in case of young people, but in case of old people, there is another thing. As the age increases, there is a tendency to develop heart disease. Even if you don't smoke, even if you don't have this alcoholism, or even if you don't do exercise, even if you don't have hypercholesterolemia, the simple factor that you are old, because there is a wear and tear principle according to body physiology. So, because of this age, the wear and tear principle itself, the person will be already having tendency to develop heart disease. And it is also a fact, people who are aged, they can't do any physical activity. So age becomes an extraneous factor or confounder here. If you don't consider this age, your report will be physical inactivity will lead to heart disease, which may be true in case of young people, but not true in case of old people. So your study is having an error over there. So confounder is a third variable which the researcher is not aware of, and that third variable can affect both the outcome and the exposure, and the ultimate result will be the result or the final answer you got into is actually wrong. So how you can avoid this confounder? You can avoid the confounder in two different stages. One is at the design stage, and one is at the statistical analysis stage. At two time you can confound. So even if you don't know what could be that third variable, so actually for this purpose you have to read. Whenever we say research methodology, go for literature review, find out the gap, find out the connection. So during those literature review, probably you will understand what could be the confounding factors or the factors which can come in between. But in case, even if you don't know, it is an unknown factor, then also by these methods, you can control confounding. So this can be controlled, the confounding can be controlled at design stage and at analytical stage. So in the design stage, you can do a restriction, you can do matching and randomization, three methods. And at analytic stage, you can do stratification and multivariate analysis. When I say this, I'll say you one experience also. 2 3 months before I went to Kochi, you might be knowing. I also had to write one exam over there. So one of the question asked for the exam was, uh, which is a method to control confounding at analytical stage. So it was a exam, competitive exam going on, and when we are reading, I also become a student like you at that time. And when we read the question, it will be like a method of. I didn't read the full. I mean, I read it, but I first read only the main part. What is the method of controlling the confounding? And then they had all these methods. Okay, four options were given. I think matching, randomization, stratification, and restriction. All the four were given. When I saw the options, I was like, all these methods are method to control confounding. What is the question? And then I again went. So the question asked was actually asked like, what is the method to control confounding during analytic stage? So initially when I read the question, because we get only less than 1 minute to answer one question and to mark our option. So initially I didn't notice that analytical stage. I was just going through and then I understood all these are methods. Then I again went and then so they have mentioned analytical stage. So there are, according to the different stages, what I say you is MCQ can come from this part. And in MCQ, you not only should remember that what are the five methods, but you should also know how this is classified, which three methods are coming during the design stage and which two methods are coming during the analytical stage. So here matching we have done, like we'll go a little by on all of these things. Matching we saw that it is to reduce the selection bias. We make the matching of case and control very much. The group matching, the pair matching. It is the same concept. And restriction is when we are going to select the people, we keep so many inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria to restrict the number of people or the features of the people we are including in our study. So restriction means the subject chosen for study or the sample we select are restricted to people who are having narrow range of characteristics. Like restrict study to women having at least one child. So which means a lot of unmarried people will be away from that study. This have a problem. It can avoid confounding, but and that means your internal validity is increased. Whatever you did that study is increased, but your external validity will be affected. Whatever report you got from this, you can't apply it to the general population. So when we do a research study, we should be aware about what are the things which will increase the internal validity, and if internal validity is increasing, are we compromising with the external validity? So though the method of restriction is good for confounding, you should be very aware if you are going to keep this much strict criteria for including the people in a study, then the result we get, it can't be applied to the general population because we have put that much condition, that much criteria, it won't be applied. Whatever report we get can't be applied to the general population. But still, this is a method. Then matching we have done. Then randomization, this is a method that we will see in RCT or randomized control method. At that time, I will say you what is randomization. And stratification and multivariation is during the analytical part or when you are doing the biostatical calculation. So in stratification, you will be classifying them into separate group, age group, socioeconomic status, etc. And then you will do the analysis. There are methods for that. And then multivariate analysis, where the data is collected on more than one variable. I'm not sure much about of this multivariate analysis. I only know the method, that is ANOVA. But what is the exact relevance of multivariate analysis? I don't know. Probably someone who's taking biostatistics for you can explain you very well this. So anyway, these two methods, stratification and multivariate analysis, it comes under analytical part. That is when you do the statistical part. And the other three method, it comes during the designing. So matching is regarding the selection. Restriction is also regarding selection. And randomization is also regarding selection and then assignment also. We'll see that in RCT. So these are the processes happening during when you are designing your study, how you want to do it, whom you want to do it, like that at the designing. And stratification and multivariate analysis you do during the analytic or biostatistical calculation. And then we go to the cohort study. Can we stop over here? Do we continue?
I think, or maybe stop here. This cohort study is another broad topic, I would say.
Yeah, another new topic. So we will
Yeah,
continue. I don't want to kill you because I know it is all a little bit difficult. Not that difficult also. So can someone
Yep.
take a screenshot?
Yeah.
Taken?
Yes.
Okay. So
Taken.